welcome to this month's episode of The Outpost. I am Adam Alexander.
And my name's Mike Hart.
And we are joined today by local author Ron LaPoint.
Ron?
Here I am.
Yeah, welcome on board, Ron. This is kind of exciting. First off, we got to talk a little bit about the DAV. We are Chapter 17 with the Disabled American Veterans, Ray H. Fuller, Winnebago County. And DAV itself has been around over 100 years, and we're all about the veterans, helping veterans, making the difference in their lives. And you are watching an award-winning show. And if I may say, oh, by the way, real quick, we meet the fourth Tuesday of the month, 6:30 p.m. at the Marine Corps League building, 4715 Sherman Road here in Oshkosh. It's right along County Road A on the lakefront. Very nice. And again, fourth Tuesday at 6:30. We actually will have potlucks at 5:30. And we had a really good one. We had a...
Pulled pork.
Yeah, pulled pork. Living the life. But anyhow, this is an award. I won't touch the award because I break it. But this is an award.
Show.
And again, we continue.
Certificates and plaques to prove it.
Yeah, so we are now we're a are we like a multi-award show, or what would we called?
Guess that would
What
be...
is Ron, you're an author. What's the plural now that we've got more than one award?
What's the plural what? The word?
Yeah, we got two now. We got two.
Awards.
Awards. And awards-winning show. Okay. But, okay. But,
Anyway.
yeah, so we're really blessed with The Outpost. It's a great show. Adam and I have been doing it for a little bit, and this is kind of unique. I'm excited about this. This is the book, Oshkosh Veterans of Foreign Wars, and the author is Ron LaPoint. And Ron, it looks like you have some local faces on there. I mean, has that increased sales because Adam and I are on it? Or?
Sure. Well, on top, left side is Lee Schuff,
Yeah.
a Korean veteran, and next to him is Dwayne Cannon, a Vietnam veteran, and of course, the two photos below are the co-host of this show.
Yeah.
And those are 4 of the 30 stories in the book.
Yeah. Whenever I look though on the book, I always think Lee's. We were lucky when we were able to get you together with him and so forth, and his wife Dar.
Right at the tail end of his life.
Yeah, and Lee was kind of a mentor figure.
Absolutely. He was...
and just but...
Achieved legend status in the veteran community,
he did.
doubt.
Oh, yeah. Purple Heart recipient, Korea and Vietnam.
Yeah.
So
Hard as woodpecker lips.
I know. Okay, Ron, I got to ask you, what? Now, one thing, this is not your first book. You've been kind of doing some of the local books. Can you fill us in? Maybe some of your past writings and just some of your past background and your motivation.
Sure. I grew up in Oshkosh, went to all the public schools, eventually graduated from the UWO, and taught high school history for a number of years, and then I decided to retire early and do some writing. And I wanted to do something different because teaching was becoming... at that stage, over 30 years, a little bit boring. I wanted to do something different. So I began writing, and eventually I had my first book published in 2008. It's called The Southsider Remembers. And then subsequently to that, I didn't think I'd ever be writing another book for publication, and then someone talked me into the next book, and then I got through that one, and then someone told me to actually write another book. He came to my house one day and he said, "Ron, I have a new book for you." I said, I didn't know I was writing another book. I said, "I got a list of 30 names here. They all have wonderful stories, but I don't want them to write them. I want you to write them." Well, after I thought about it for some time, I wrote that book, and then 4 more after that. My 2 recent books are Women of Oshkosh, that was publicized, a little bit more than 2 years ago.
Yep.
And then this book, Oshkosh Veterans of Foreign Wars. I got the idea for this book when I went to the War Memorial at South Park. And when I was reading those names of those veterans who gave their lives for their country in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, I was thinking that it might also be fitting to write about those who came home after serving in these faraway lands. And I had already 2 stories that if I wrote the book, I wanted in the book. One person that I knew from World War II, and the other person from the Korean War. And I knew their stories, and I knew they needed telling, and I thought there should be other veterans in the community that may want their stories told and preserved too. The initial problem was, where do I find them? And thanks to a variety of people, I did find them. First of all, I asked the Oshkosh Herald if they would include an article in their paper that I wrote asking for veterans who would want their stories told and to give me a call or write me a letter. And I got lots of names, including one of my former students.
Wow.
And he said, Ron, he said, I saw your article in the paper. He said, my mother saved a box full, very heavy, I found out, of stories from World War II. And many of those were Oshkosh Northwestern articles. So I thought, well, I picked them up and I thought I'd scan the articles, but they were so interesting that I included in those Northwestern articles 6 or 7 short stories of World War II veterans who served in various areas during World War II because I thought their stories were interesting. Not only that, but my World War II buddy, friend that I bowled with and who died over 10 years ago, I found 2 stories on him too in these papers and included them in the story that I originally wrote. And lastly, the person that helped me the most is sitting to my right, Mike Hurt. Without Mike, this book would not have happened.
Well, thank you for the kind words, Ron. It's just there's so often I brought up on the show that every veteran is a slice of U.S. history, and they really are. And that was so neat that you were able to sit down with all the folks. And I want to tag on one. I just want to tag on one that meant a lot to me. And I have actually brought the glasses and a little bit of a dramatic reading on this one. But Scott, could you pull up the picture of Dottie Musa? And I'll begin reading. This is about John Musa, and I knew back in my younger years when I worked at Mercy, I knew Dottie and John, and I worked with Dottie, and I had no clue until this last year or two when I was visiting with Dottie. She showed me a book that her husband had pulled together. I had no idea that he was a combat veteran. So I'm reading on page 8, and it's just unbelievable. Fighting was extremely fierce in the town of Tillet, and it was some days before our division was able to drive the Germans back. It was here that my platoon sergeant was killed, supposedly by one of our own tanks backing over him. I didn't see it happen, but Don Burmeister of Shawano told me he did. It was during some of this action that I was more scared than ever because of a close call on me. We were caught out in the field with heavy machine gun and rifle fire. and I was trying to crawl back into a ravine we had just left when I could see the enemy and saw that a German had me in his sights. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain on my left side and thought I was shot in the stomach. I made it safely to the ditch and sat down to see where I was hit. I did not see any blood, so I started to remove the gear. And I had a hole in the ammo pouch bag, followed by a hole in my overcoat, followed by a hole in my field jacket. And then in my jacket, I found a spent German bullet that hit me, but went no further. So, I mean, his just amazing stories. And John actually ended up getting the Purple Heart, the Combat Infantryman's Badge, which is like the Olympic gold in my book as a soldier, and also got a Bronze Star. So I mean, he was very well decorated. Never knew it.
Yeah, one of the most pleasant times while writing this book is when Mike Hurt took me up to Evergreen to visit Dottie Musa. And Dottie at that time was laying in bed, and but very cognizant of what was happening. And I introduced myself and said that, and Mike had told me about her husband's narrative that he wrote because of the encouragement of his wife and three daughters, I think. And she was so happy to know that I wanted to include her husband's story in the book. And that was so satisfying to me to meet such a wonderful woman.
Yeah. If you could just bring that picture back up real quick, Scott, from Evergreen. This is really kind of cool because on our right is Ron, and then is myself and one of, I believe, Dottie's son-in-law. And to the very far left is Hal Fritz, Medal of Honor recipient. And Dottie had no idea she was getting presented a book that day and that her husband's story would be in there. And that was a big day.
Yes. And, yes. And after Mr. Fritz, I briefly introduced myself to those that were there. And I saw Dottie sitting there in her chair, and I had the pleasure of presenting Dottie with that book, and she was so pleased.
Yeah. Ron, you did good. Now, we got another picture of someone that I think is near and dear to us that's sitting in the middle here and had a story done on him. Is there one on Adam? Oh, he's looking like bad news. What was that like when you guys got together, Ron?
Well, I didn't know Adam's story, and when we set up the interview, Adam came over, and he was one of the most pleasant, cheerful, optimistic kind of guys that I interviewed for the book. And when he told me his story, my goodness, it was one of the most interesting but sad stories that I wrote for the book, and I'm sure Adam could tell the story better than me. But after he was on patrol in Afghanistan, he was shot in the right part of his head by a sniper of sorts, and a part of his skull was taken off, and of course he was blinded in one eye, and he was told that he had 5% chance of living. But after months and months and months of hospital and doctor care, here he is. Yes, what a great story. Yes. And two, this past year, Adam excuse me, Adam and Michael went to Orlando, Florida, so Adam could receive his National DAV Award for the DAV Veteran of the Year. And I'm sure that day in Orlando was very nice for both of you.
Very humbling, yes.
Yeah, you know, the thing is you take a look at with DAV, we're 1 million members, 1,200 chapters across the U.S. and in the territories and stuff, and you know, to get that award, but it also is an indicator, you know, of the tenacity and ferocity of him,
Sure.
because we both served in Afghanistan, and quite frankly, he should have been dead. But
Yeah, by all accounts, yeah.
yeah, but I mean, it's amazing, and you've never ever given up.
Yes.
You never did, and now you're proud papa.
I am, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So how's the little one?
I'd like to
The
say
baby's
something.
15 months now.
15-month-old baby now.
I'd like to say something of the Vietnam veterans. I didn't, as I mentioned before, I didn't know who would be in the book because I didn't really know many veterans who served overseas. But my next door neighbor was a Vietnam veteran, Dan O'Neill. And after I interviewed him and talked to him, I became aware of Agent Orange and those who served during that war. And on the basis of what I learned, not only from the 15 Vietnam veterans and from items that I read, just about everybody was affected.
Yeah.
Not only American veterans, but the Vietnamese people. Many died, and many, including 3 of our Vietnam veterans, got very ill, and including, let's see, John Sria, who almost died because of it, and of course Dan O'Neill. So that in PTSD was a very important side issue of not only Vietnam veterans but all veterans. There was one veteran, Dwayne Cannon's brother, Dell.
Yeah, Dell. That was you're right. We in the book are Dell and Dwayne Cannon.
Yes.
Yeah. So you had actually twin brothers.
Yeah.
So
Well, you know, most of those suffering from those post-traumatic experiences, you know, drank a lot, including my buddy who was in World War II. That friend of mine who I bowled with later in life was on the Bataan Death March, and he survived, marching those 70 miles up to, I think it was Camp O'Donnell, that the Japanese had already taken over. He survived not only that, but also survived in a slave labor camp in Japan. And this person, I'll call, well, his name is Bob Primino, a friend of mine, as I said, every night. Now, I only knew this from bowling because I bowled with him a few times a week. Every night, he drank a 1/5 of rye whiskey, water on the side, no exceptions. And he did this, I'm sure, I learned later, that to cover up the pain and suffering that he experienced. He also liked to kid a lot, talk a lot, and entertain not only us bowlers, but most everybody he met. That also wasn't a cover-up of his pain. I didn't learn that until one night after we got done bowling. We met at his house, did the usual bowling chit-chat, and then he went to another room, got a box of, we found out mementos from World War II, and he told about his experiences. And we were so mesmerized by what he said.
Yeah.
And that's when I knew him. And Dale Cannon also drank a lot, he told me. But what he did instead of what Bob Primino did is he began writing poetry.
Yeah.
And at the interview, he brought, among other things, this book of poetry. And he said, if you want to look at some of these poems, go ahead. Well, the poems were so interesting, and I thought really captured what he was going through that I put 3 in the book, and that served what he really went through. And there were others as well.
Yeah,
Right now, he's looking up maybe one of those poems.
yeah, I will.
You got to?
Oh,
Right near the end.
A Silent Vigil. Did you want to read it?
I can.
Okay.
A silent vigil. I looked into his eyes and saw the battles and deaths of his friends. As tears ran down his face, he reached out and touched each name with his hand, saying nothing but his eyes told the story. Friends with whom he fought with and gave their lives, so that others may be free. As he touched the wall for the last time, saying a silent goodbye to the soldiers he fought with, he turned and walked away, leaving only his reflection on the wall. It's powerful.
Yes. Very interesting person. He no longer lives in Oshkosh, but he lives in Brookfield, and he was in his, yes.
I have a question. Did
Yes.
you find any difference between Vietnam veterans, Iraq, Afghan veterans? Just kind of an observation. Just
Yes. Now, you may differ from me because I didn't
Yeah, it just-
serve in either. The only place I served was in Missouri for 2 years after being drafted. The Vietnam veterans, to me, suffered quite a bit. Not everyone, but a number of them, to the point that their experiences over there, fighting the Viet Cong, not knowing who the enemy was, not that you guys did, being wary of any Vietnamese person they met, had to be a very serious problem for them, and I think it was. Yeah. So.
if you know that's one thing though that I always like to mention is like Iraq Afghan veterans. We got really nice welcome homes, and we got lots of support. And I think that was the other thing that was so rough for the Vietnam veterans. And I look at my brother-in-law Dan. I mean, they were told take off your uniforms in the bathroom and get in the civvies. And you were going to say something, Ron.
Well, since you brought that up, a number of the Vietnam veterans mentioned that they were spit on when they entered the United States. Paul Reitman was one who experienced that. Dan O'Neill, when he came home on a leave after serving in Vietnam, Dan is my neighbor, he said he went to one of the bars in Oshkosh and had his uniform on. And as soon as he walked up to the bar to order a drink, he said he was accused of, someone said, "You're a baby killer. What are you doing around here?" That kind of a thing. Well, it's surprised and agitated him.
Yeah.
And maybe I shouldn't tell this part of the story, but when the guy went into the bathroom, Dan followed him, and he said he followed him with a beer bottle, and the patrons heard some noise. Dan walked out of the bathroom, out of the building, and somebody apparently called the cops on him. And when he got to his car, the cop car was there, but he knew the cop. He said, "Dan, shame on you for doing such a thing." He said, "I understand what you were going through when you were accused of this, but please don't do that anymore." But he let him go. And
Understood.
and those two, Paul and Dan, were not the only persons that had experienced what you were saying, I'll tell you. And that was another big difference. And people like from Afghanistan and Iraq were treated differently when they came home, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
and we owe the Vietnam veterans
And that was
for
good.
those warm welcomes.
Well, one of the stories and special in here, which was meant a lot to me, is my son Christian had a chapter, and One thing I got to tell you, it's like when you go somewhere, it's like, oh, okay. But it's when your kid goes somewhere, it's like, wait a second, So, but I just wanted to read something real quick. It was difficult for me being in an all-out war zone at the age of 20. On September 26, 1 month after our mission started, I lost my friend and former coach, Sergeant Andrew Wallace, when he was the first leading vehicle in a convoy. Andrew Wallace taught at Emmeline Cook. He and the driver were killed when their vehicle was hit by an improvised explosive device, better known as an IED, and by an EFP, which is an explosive form projectile. I found out about his death minutes before I was called to duty. I was distraught, confused, and didn't know what to do. I wanted to call or email home, but because the base was on blackout, I couldn't. Blackout occurs when a serviceman dies. No one can communicate back home until the soldier's family is notified. Could you read that second? I'm not doing so good.
2 days later, I was asked to help escort his body to the airport, but before I could, an Air Force convoy was attacked in Safwan, and those of us in security were sent to support them. My convoy experience that year consisted of 4 IED attacks, small arms fire, and lots of mortar attacks at various places in Iraq.
Yeah.
Rough.
And you captured it, Ron.
Yes.
You captured it.
It was a pleasure writing that book. And again, I thank all of those veterans who had enough faith in me that it would tell their story honestly. And I appreciate that.
I did want to do a nice plug here. If we could find out where these books, these fine books here, are sold here in town, if you could throw that up. They are available at Oshkosh Public Museum, Carmel Crisp, Hometown Pharmacies, Oshkosh Military Veterans Museum, Jerry's Tavern, the VFW, the Saturday's Farmer Market, and Oak Candy. And these are at a very nice price book. How much are they for, Ron?
$18.
$18.
A bargain at twice the price.
A bargain at twice the price. And again, the Oshkosh Public Museum, Carmel Crisp, Hometown Pharmacy, Oshkosh Military Veterans Museum, Jerry's Tavern, VFW, Saturday Farm Market, and Oaks Candy. Yeah. Now, I do understand. Now, did you say Dwayne Cannon is getting a commission for all the books he's selling?
Well, I thought about it, really. But I haven't moved on that yet.
Yeah. No, yeah. Dwayne is just, he is such a salesman, and Dwayne is just
and
such
so
a go-getter.
committed. Yeah, my goodness. And
so I got a question for you. We're heading literally into the final minute. What's next?
What's next?
What's next? What's next for Ron LaPoint, the author?
Well,
you're like,
actually, I've given it some thought, but I don't really know for sure.
Okay.
Although, very briefly, I made a presentation last year to a group of women at Evergreen Manor. I had so many questions on what Oshkosh was like years ago. Well, I lived here all my life, and I could answer a few of them, but not all of them. So I thought maybe I could write something about a book entitled Oshkosh Remembered. But who knows? If you have any ideas, anybody, let me know.
That wraps up this edition of the Outpost. Hey.